You never think it's going to happen to you. You hear stories about the friend of a friend whose wife was sneaking around, about the guy at work who came home early to find his wife in bed with someone else. But that's just other people's problems until one day, it's yours. Wendy and I had been married for 9 years. Long enough to know her habits, her moods, and the subtle shifts in the way she looked at me. At first, I blamed myself for the distance growing between us. Maybe I was working too much. Maybe I wasn't as exciting as I used to be, but the excuses started piling up. She was suddenly too tired for sex. She had new friends I'd never met. Her phone, once an afterthought, was now practically glued to her hand. That I told myself it was just a rough patch. Every couple has them, right? Then, one night, I caught her standing outside, whispering into her phone. She laughed, that kind of laugh. The one she used to have with me. Something in my gut twisted. That was the moment I knew that I didn't say anything. Not yet. I needed to be sure. So I started watching, waiting, and then, one night, without even meaning to, I found her, sitting in the back seat of my taxi, with him, and the look on her face when she saw me in the rearview mirror. I'll never forget it. Before I ended up driving a taxi, I had a decent office job. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough, and Wendy and I lived comfortably. At least, I thought we did. Then, out of nowhere, the company downsized. I was let go with little warning, and just like that, my stable life cracked. I took a temporary job as a taxi driver while I figured out my next move. It wasn't ideal, but it put money in our account. Wendy wasn't exactly supportive. You're really going to drive people around all night? She sighed, barely glancing up from her phone. It's not exactly the kind of job that gets you ahead, Lucas. I brushed it off at first. She liked comfort. Stability. But soon, her comments changed. You're out so late, she murmured one night, curling into bed long after I got home. I barely see you anymore. I almost laughed at the irony. She barely saw me. I was the one getting home to a wife who barely looked up from her phone, who turned away when I reached for her, who suddenly had plans with people I had never heard of. The signs were there. I just hadn't been ready to see them. Then, one night, I found the first real clue. That I came home earlier than usual, just after midnight instead of the usual 2 a.m. Wendy wasn't in bed. Not in the kitchen. The house was quiet, but her purse was still on the counter. I glanced out the window, and there she was. Standing outside, her back was turned, phone pressed to her ear. She was laughing, but not the forced, tired kind I had gotten used to. This was different. Flirty. Light. Excited. I didn't recognize her voice like this. She kept saying his name. Josh. My stomach twisted, my breath going shallow. Who the hell was Josh? She hung up, took a deep breath, and walked back inside. I barely had time to move before she stepped into the kitchen. Her eyes flickered with surprise when she saw me. She hadn't expected me to be home yet. Oh, she said, forcing a smile. You're back early. Who were you talking to? I asked, keeping my voice calm. She blinked. Just for a second. Then the lie. Sarah, she said smoothly. She's having trouble with her boyfriend again. I nodded slowly, watching her. She didn't even hesitate. Wendy had always been good at lying. But this was the first time I knew she was doing it, and that night, as I lay in bed next to her, I made a decision that I wasn't going to ask her again. I wasn't going to argue. I was just going to wait, because if Wendy was cheating on me, I wouldn't find out through rumors or suspicions. I was going to catch her myself, and soon enough, I did. Once I heard the name Josh, something inside me shifted. I could have confronted Wendy that night, demanded to see her phone, forced the truth out of her. But I knew her. She would just lie. Cry. Make me feel like the bad guy for even suspecting her. No, I needed proof. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I started paying attention, not just to her, but to the little things. The way she suddenly started dressing nicer, even on days she had errands to run. The way she started leaving the room to answer phone calls. The way she laughed at texts and then quickly locked her screen, and then, the biggest clue point, one night, after she fell asleep, I waited. Made sure her breathing was deep, her body still. Then I reached over and took her phone from the nightstand that I knew her passcode. She didn't think she needed to hide it. She had gotten cocky that I opened her messages and scrolled, and there he was. Josh. Their texts were buried under fake names and half-deleted conversations, but I found enough. Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. Same place this Friday? My fingers tightened around the phone. Wendy had always been a good liar. But this? This wasn't just an innocent friendship. She was meeting him and she thought I'd never know that. I set her phone back down, careful not to wake her. I could have woken her up right then, shoved her own messages in her face, demanded an explanation, but no. I wanted more. I wanted to see it. I wanted to catch her, and that's when I got an idea. She didn't know where I worked. Didn't know which shifts I took or what routes I drove. To her, I was just out driving. So what if I just happened to be in the right place at the right time? What if she and Josh got into my cab? The plan formed instantly. All I had to do was wait, and soon enough, Wendy would walk straight into her own trap. For the next few days, I waited. I watched Wendy more closely than I ever had before. And I saw it all: the fake smiles, the little white lies, the way she couldn't even look me in the eye when she told me she was just grabbing dinner with the girls. She thought she was so smart, but she had no idea I had already read her messages. She had no idea I knew everything. Friday came. The day she had planned her little date with Josh. She left the house in a rush, practically glowing with excitement. She didn't even say goodbye. That was fine, because I was already 2 steps ahead. That I took my regular taxi shift, but I made sure I was exactly where I needed to be, near the restaurant where she and Josh were meeting. I kept my eyes on the road, my grip steady on the wheel. Waiting, and then there she was. I saw her before she saw me. Wendy walked out of the restaurant, laughing, her arm wrapped around another man's. Josh. He wasn't anything special. Mid-30s, decent suit, expensive watch. But he wasn't me. She leaned into him, her lips close to his ear, whispering something that made him smile. I felt nothing. Then, they walked up to the curb, looking for a ride, and that's when fate played into my hands. Another cab was about to pull up, but I cut in smoothly, stopping right in front of them. Wendy didn't even look at me. She didn't recognize me, not yet. Josh opened the door for her like some gentleman, and she slid inside, still giggling. Then, he got in beside her, pulling the door shut. I adjusted the mirror, keeping my face neutral. Where to? Wendy barely glanced up, too busy snuggling against him. Then she froze, her body stiffened, her hand tightening around Josh's arm. I watched as her eyes flickered up toward the rearview mirror, and in that single second she saw me. I saw the color drain from her face, saw her lips part slightly, her breath hitch in her throat. Josh, oblivious, was still smiling. Yeah, just take us to stop the car, Wendy whispered. I smiled. Why? I asked, my voice calm. Cold. We're just getting started. And just like that, the ride of her life had begun. Silence filled the cab. Josh still hadn't noticed the shift in Wendy. He was relaxed, one arm draped over her shoulder like he owned her, but Wendy, she looked like she had seen a ghost. Her fingers dug into his arm, her breathing unsteady. Her eyes flickered between the rearview mirror and the door handle like she was calculating whether she could jump out at the next red light. I let the silence stretch, let the weight of the moment sink into her bones. Then, I pressed my foot on the gas. Josh cleared his throat. Buddy, did you hear me? I said. I heard you, I said, my voice perfectly even. Wendy flinched. Josh laughed, shaking his head. All right, man, no need to be weird about it. I could see Wendy struggling to breathe. Trying to find the words to fix this. But she had no way out, not this time, so, I said, keeping my eyes on the road. How was dinner? Josh smirked, clearly thinking I was just making small talk. Yeah, it was nice. First time at that spot. Food was great, right? babe? Babe, Wendy swallowed hard. Her nails dug into her dress, Wendy. I prompted, keeping my voice calm. Controlled. Dangerous. Her eyes met mine in the mirror. She knew exactly what I was doing. She licked her lips, her voice coming out small. It was good. Josh chuckled. Good? That's it? You were practically moaning over that steak. She stiffened that I tightened my grip on the wheel. Oh, she does that, huh? Wendy's face went pale. Josh let out another laugh, still clueless. Yeah, man, I guess so. Maybe she just appreciates a good meal. I smirked. Or maybe she just appreciates something new. That's when Josh noticed that he sat up a little, looking between me and Wendy, frowning. Wait, do you too? Wendy grabbed his arm, squeezing hard. Josh, shut up. He looked at her. Then back at me, and then it clicked that he jerked forward. Wait a second. Who the hell are you? I met his eyes in the mirror. Let him see exactly who I was. I'm her husband. Josh's entire body locked up. Oh, Lucas, Wendy blurted, panic creeping into her voice, pull over. Now. I didn't. Instead, I kept driving because this ride wasn't over yet. Wendy's breathing turned shallow. Her hands trembled as she clung to Josh's arm, but it wasn't for comfort, it was for control. She was panicking. Good that I kept driving, my expression calm, my grip steady on the wheel. I wasn't rushing, wasn't yelling. That would have been too easy for her. No, I wanted her to feel every second of this. Josh, on the other hand, was losing it. Whoa, man, he stammered, sitting up straighter. You're her what? He turned to Wendy, his voice rising. You told me you were single. Wendy snapped. Shut up, Josh, she hissed, digging her nails into his arm. Just let me handle this. Handle this? I smiled in the rearview mirror. Oh, I'd love to see how she planned to do that. Josh yanked his arm free, his face twisting with realization. Oh my God. You're married? You've been lying this whole time? Wendy ignored him. Her focus was on me now. Lucas, she tried, her voice shifting soft now, pleading. This is crazy. Just pull over so we can talk. Talk, like she hadn't already lied to my face for months. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the wheel. What's there to talk about, Wendy? My voice was cool, even. Too calm. You've already said everything I need to know. Her hands clenched in her lap. I swear, it's not what you think. Josh let out a dry laugh. Not what he thinks? Lady, are you serious right now? He turned to me, shaking his head. Man, I had no idea she was married. She told me you were her ex, said you were crazy. That you couldn't let her go. Ah, there it was. I let out a small chuckle. That so? Wendy's eyes darted to the door handle like she was thinking of jumping out. I caught the movement and locked the doors with a single click. Her body stiffened. Josh turned back to her, his voice sharper now. What else did you lie about, Wendy? She snapped her head toward him, eyes blazing. Josh, shut up. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Wow. Unbelievable. How many other guys are there? Wendy's head whipped around to me. Lucas, please. She was desperate now, her voice trembling. Just pull over. I can explain. Explain what? I asked, my voice still calm. Controlled. How you told me you loved me, then spent your nights moaning his name instead. Her face collapsed. Josh let out another bitter chuckle. Oh wow. So you two were still together the whole time? I met his gaze in the mirror. Let me ask you something, Josh. He hesitated. Yeah? You ever wonder why she never invited you over? Why she always met you in hotels or your place? Josh's jaw clenched. Yeah, actually. I smiled. Because she was coming home to me. Josh's face twisted. He turned to Wendy. You are a piece of work. Wendy looked between us, trapped. Cornered. No way out that I slowed the car as we approached an empty parking lot on the edge of town. A place with no witnesses, Josh gulped. Where are we going? Wendy's breath hitched. Lucas, please. I pulled into the lot, shifted the car into park, and finally turned around, and the look on my face told them both this ride was far from over. The car sat in silence, the only sound was Wendy's uneven breathing. She knew. Knew she had run out of places to hide, out of words to twist, out of excuses to throw in my face. Josh looked from me to her, his leg bouncing slightly. Dude, he muttered, voice uneasy, why are we in an empty parking lot? Wendy answered before I could. Lucas, she whispered, swallowing hard. I'm sorry. I messed up. I leaned back against my seat, studying her through the mirror. Which part, Wendy? My voice was calm, too calm. The part where you cheated? Or the part where you planned to keep doing it until I found out? Her lower lip trembled. I was going to tell you. Josh let out a scoff, running a hand through his hair. Oh, come on, he muttered. You literally told me last week that you and your husband weren't together anymore. I turned to Wendy, raising an eyebrow. That true? She shook her head quickly. No. He's lying, Lucas. Josh let out a bitter laugh. I'm lying? Lady, I didn't even know you had a husband until 10 minutes ago. He exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. Man, I swear, I thought she was single. I wouldn't have touched her if I knew. He looked disgusted. Not with me. With her, for the first time tonight, Wendy wasn't just lying to me. She was losing him, too. She grabbed his arm. Josh, don't say that. He pulled away. Fast, are you serious? He snapped. You were playing both of us, and now you're trying to act like I should still care? He shook his head, jaw clenched. God, I was a fool. I chuckled. Yeah. Welcome to the club. Josh let out a dry, humorless laugh, shaking his head. Damn, man. He glanced at Wendy, then back at me. I don't know how you put up with her. Wendy gasped, her head snapping toward him. Excuse me? You heard me. His voice was sharp now, cutting. You lied to me. You played your husband like he was an idiot. You think I want to be involved in that mess? He huffed. I thought you were different. Turns out you're just another lying. Shut up, Josh, she screamed. For the first time, she was unraveling that. I smiled. It doesn't feel good, does it? She turned to me now, rage in her eyes. You set me up. I tilted my head. And you walked straight into it. She clenched her jaw. You were never supposed to know. That's when I saw it, that tiny slip. Not I didn't mean to. Not it was a mistake that I wasn't supposed to know, because that's what this was to her. Not love. Not regret. A game, and for the first time in our marriage, she was losing. Josh exhaled sharply and reached for the door handle. I'm outta here, he muttered. Wendy spun toward him, desperate now. Josh, wait. We can fix this. Josh let out a bitter laugh. Fix it? Lady, I'm not even your damn husband. With that, he yanked the door open and stepped out, shaking his head as he walked away, leaving Wendy alone, with me. And for the first time all night, I saw real fear in her eyes, because now, she had no one left to lie to, and she had no idea what I was going to do next. Josh was gone, the door slammed shut behind him, his footsteps fading into the night as he walked away, cursing under his breath. And now, it was just me and her. For the first time, Wendy didn't have a backup. No lover to defend her. No audience to manipulate. No one left to believe her lies. She sat there, stiff, hands clenched in her lap. She didn't try to leave. Didn't even reach for the door handle. Because she knew that I wasn't letting her go that easily, that I let the silence stretch, watching her through the rearview mirror. Finally, I spoke. You were never going to tell me, were you? She flinched but quickly masked it, lifting her chin slightly. Lucas, I cut her off. Don't. Her jaw clenched. I don't. She exhaled sharply, gripping her dress. What do you want me to say? She snapped, her voice edged with frustration. Like I was the problem here. That I tilted my head. The truth. She let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. The truth? She scoffed. Okay. Fine. You want the truth? I stayed silent. Waiting. She looked up, meeting my gaze in the mirror. I was bored. There it was, not an apology. Not regret. Just the truth. She sighed heavily, rolling her shoulders like the weight of pretending had finally been lifted. You changed, Lucas, she muttered. When we first got married, you were ambitious, exciting. But then life happened. You lost your job. You started driving a taxi. You became predictable. I gripped the wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. She noticed and smiled like she had won something. I didn't plan for this, she continued, voice smooth now, controlled. But then Josh came along, and he made me feel. She paused, searching for the right words. That I finished for her. Like you had options. Her smile faltered. That I nodded slowly. You didn't cheat because you loved him. You cheated because you wanted to see if you could do better. She swallowed but said nothing. And what did you learn tonight, Wendy? I leaned forward slightly. Did you do better? She didn't answer because we both knew the truth. Josh had walked away without a second thought. The moment he realized what she was, he left, and now, she had nothing. She licked her lips, her voice turning softer. Pleading. Lucas, we can fix this. I let out a slow breath, shaking my head. No, Wendy. My voice was quiet. Final. You broke it. And you broke yourself in the process. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't real. Nothing about her had ever been real. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't devastated, she was just afraid of what life looked like without me. That I unlocked the doors. Get out. She blinked. What? I turned to face her now, my voice steady. Unshaken. Get out. Her breath hitched. Lucas, please, now. She hesitated. But she knew I wasn't playing anymore. Slowly, she reached for the door handle and stepped out, her heels clicking against the pavement. She turned back, waiting for me to take it back. To yell. To beg her to stay, but I didn't. That I stared at her for a long moment. Then, without another word, I drove away, leaving her exactly where she deserved to be, alone. That I didn't look back, not once. That I could still see her in the rearview mirror, standing there in the middle of that empty parking lot, her arms wrapped around herself, her face frozen in shock. She never expected this. She had spent our entire marriage controlling the narrative. Spinning lies. Manipulating me. And for years, I had fallen for it. But not tonight. Tonight, she was the one who got left behind. The road stretched ahead of me, the hum of the engine steady beneath my hands. My mind should have been racing, my heart should have been pounding, but instead, I felt nothing. No sadness. No anger. Just clarity. Wendy had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. And all that time, she had looked me in the eye, kissed me goodnight, pretended to be my wife. But the truth, she had stopped being my wife a long time ago. 15 minutes into my drive, my phone buzzed. I glanced down. Wendy. I let it ring. A few seconds later, another buzz. A message. I didn't even need to read it. I already knew what it would say. I unlocked my phone at a red light and scrolled down. Lucas, please. Just talk to me. I smirked. Talk? Like she hadn't just spent months sneaking around behind my back. Like she hadn't just planned to go home with another man tonight. I let out a breath, then tapped the screen, blocked. The next time she called, she'd hear nothing but silence, and that's what she deserved. That I pulled into an all-night diner off the highway, somewhere I used to go before I met Wendy. Back when I had a life of my own. That I ordered coffee, black, no sugar. The way I liked it. The way Wendy always said was, too bitter. It tasted perfect. That I leaned back in the booth, my phone sitting face down on the table. For the first time in years, no one was waiting for me. No one was checking my location. No one was twisting my words, making me feel like I was the problem. For the first time in years, I was free, and Wendy, she had just lost the one person who actually cared about her. I took another sip of coffee, the taste of it sharper, cleaner, better, and for the first time since this all began I smiled. The diner was quiet. Just the low hum of late-night conversations, the occasional clink of a coffee cup against porcelain. Peaceful. That I stirred my coffee absently, staring at the dark liquid. It was strange, really. I had just caught my wife cheating. Exposed her lies. Left her standing in the middle of an empty parking lot like a forgotten mistake, and yet I wasn't broken. No rage. No sadness. No urge to call her back and demand answers I already knew, just relief. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my recent calls. Wendy's name was still there, her last attempt at keeping control blocked. I scrolled further. Past missed messages. Past old notifications. Then I found a name I hadn't seen in a long time, Eric. One of my closest friends. Someone Wendy had pushed out of my life. You don't need people like that, Lucas, she used to say. He's not on our level. She always said our level like she was better than everyone else. Like she was better than me. I stared at his name for a moment, then tapped the call button. It rang twice before he picked up. Hello? His voice was groggy, confused. I smiled slightly. Hey, man. A long pause. Then, Lucas? Yeah, I said, leaning back in the booth. It's been a while. We talked for over an hour, not about Wendy. Not about what just happened. Just, life, catching up on lost time. Laughing at old jokes. Remembering who I was before she made me forget. Eric hesitated at one point. So, why'd you call? I exhaled slowly. Because I should have done it a long time ago. And I meant it. Wendy had isolated me. Cut me off from people who actually cared. Kept me in a bubble where she was the only thing that mattered. Not anymore. By the time I hung up, I wasn't just sitting in a diner. I was sitting in my own life again, and for the first time in years, it belonged to me. I sat in that booth long after the call ended, my fingers wrapped around the warm coffee cup, my mind clearer than it had been in years. For so long, my life had revolved around Wendy. What she wanted, how she felt, what she needed. And in return, she had given me nothing but lies. But now, she was gone, and for the first time, I didn't feel empty. I checked my phone again. No messages. No missed calls. Wendy wasn't trying anymore. Maybe she was still in that parking lot, still processing what had just happened. Or maybe she had already started looking for her next option. I didn't care. She was no longer my problem. The waitress came by again, refilling my coffee. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with a tired but friendly smile. You need anything else? She asked. I shook my head. No, I'm good. Thanks. She nodded and walked off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. And that's when it hit me. For the first time in a long time, I had choices. I wasn't stuck anymore. I could do whatever I wanted, go wherever I wanted. Live for myself instead of for someone who never truly cared. I exhaled slowly, letting the thought settle in. Then, I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I opened a travel app and started looking at places. New cities. New opportunities. A fresh start, because I wasn't just leaving Wendy behind. I was leaving behind the version of myself she had created. And this time, I was finally free. I sat in that booth, staring at my phone, scrolling through destinations. It was strange having options. For years, my choices had been shaped around Wendy's wants, her plans, her world, where we lived. Where we vacationed or didn't, because she never wanted to go anywhere unless it was expensive enough to impress her friends. The way we spent weekends, the way I spent my time, the way my career had to align with her expectations, but now, she wasn't a factor anymore. That I could go anywhere. Do anything. Be anyone. But first, I had to figure out where I wanted to start. That I scrolled past cities I'd always wanted to visit: New York, Seattle, Denver. Places I had once dreamed about, before Wendy convinced me those dreams weren't realistic. I took a sip of my coffee, letting my mind drift back. Before Wendy, I had ambitions. I had plans. I wanted to start my own business, something in logistics, something that mattered. I wanted to build something, but every time I talked about it, Wendy would shoot me down. "Lucas, let's be real," she would say, crossing her arms. "You don't have the experience. You don't have the money. It's not going to happen." And like a fool, I believed her. She didn't want a husband who chased dreams. She wanted one who stayed in place. A man who was predictable. Stable. Easily controlled. I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the coffee cup. Not anymore. I opened my notes app and started typing business ideas. Old ones I had pushed aside. New ones forming as I thought. Plans that didn't include her. For the first time in years, I was planning for my future, not ours, because there was no ours anymore. As I scrolled through my notes, my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it. But then I saw the name, Wendy. I frowned. Didn't I already block her? Then I realized she must have used someone else's phone. I sighed and tapped the message open. "Wendy, Lucas, please. Just talk to me. One last time." One last time. I leaned back in the booth, watching the words on the screen. The old me would have responded. Would have let her pull me back in with some excuse, some half-truth designed to keep me tangled in her web, but I wasn't that man anymore. I tapped the screen, hovering over the reply box. I could say something cutting. I could lay out all the ways she had destroyed what we had. Or I could say nothing. I smiled to myself, locked my phone, and set it face down on the table. I didn't need closure. I already had it. I waved the waitress over and paid my bill. As I walked outside, the air felt different. Lighter. The weight I had carried for so long, the doubt, the frustration, the feeling of never being enough was finally gone. I had spent years trying to prove to Wendy that I was worthy of her love, but now I understood the truth: she had never been worthy of me. I got in my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot. I wasn't running away. I was finally moving forward, and for the first time in a long time I couldn't wait to see what came next. The engine hummed beneath my hands as I drove, the road stretching endlessly ahead of me. It felt different, like I was no longer heading towards something I dreaded, but finally moving towards something better. For the first time, I wasn't worried about checking in with Wendy. I wasn't wondering if she was home, if she was lying to me, if she was with him, because none of that mattered anymore. She had lost the power to control me, to define me, and that realization, it was freedom. I pulled off the highway at a gas station, more out of habit than necessity. As I stepped out to stretch, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I frowned. Wendy was blocked. She couldn't reach me, but when I checked the screen, I saw a different name, Josh. I exhaled sharply, leaning against the car. Of all the people to reach out, why him? I hesitated, then opened the message. "Josh, hey man. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. But I just wanted to say. I didn't know. I swear. If I did, I wouldn't have touched her." I stared at the words, my grip tightening around the phone. He didn't have to text me. He could have walked away from this mess, never thought about it again. But he didn't, and that told me everything I needed to know. I thought about ignoring him. But then, before I could stop myself, I typed a response. "Me, you weren't the problem, Josh. She was." I hit send and locked my phone, and just like that, the last piece of my past was put to rest. As I stood there, staring at the open road, I realized something. For years, I had been stuck. Trying to make Wendy happy, trying to be the husband she wanted, trying to be enough, but no matter what I did, it was never enough for her, and that wasn't my failure. It was hers. I took a deep breath, got back in my car, and pulled back onto the highway that I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in years, I didn't care because wherever I ended up, it would be my choice, not hers. The highway stretched ahead, endless and open. A road with no ties, no past, no weight dragging me down. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing home to Wendy. I wasn't preparing for another argument, another lie, another excuse that I was driving towards something better, something that belonged to me. That I rolled down the window, letting the wind cut through the silence. The air smelled different, cleaner. Like the weight of the past was finally peeling off my skin, layer by layer. That I checked my phone at the next stop. No new messages. No calls from Wendy. Nothing. She had finally stopped trying. I scrolled through my contacts again, my thumb hovering over familiar names. Names I hadn't seen in years, not because I didn't want to, but because Wendy had made sure I didn't. She always had a way of steering me away from people who weren't useful to her. "Why do you even hang out with him?" she'd say. "He's not on the same level as us. Do we really have to go? I just feel like we've outgrown them." It was never about what I wanted. That I had cut people off for her. Let friendships fade. And for what? A woman who saw me as an option while I treated her like a priority. I clenched my jaw and tapped the screen, calling. A few seconds passed before the voice answered. "Lucas?" I exhaled. "Yeah. It's me." Silence. Then laughter. A deep, genuine laugh I hadn't heard in years. "Man, I thought you were dead." I chuckled. "Nah. Just married." "Same thing," he muttered. Then his voice softened. "So what's up?" I thought for a second. Then I said the words I should have said a long time ago. "I think I'm finally ready to start over." After I hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring out at the open road. That I didn't need to check my phone anymore. Didn't need to wait for her to try again, because even if she did, I wouldn't answer. She was my past, and I was done living in the past. That I turned the key, the engine rumbling to life beneath my hands, and as I pulled onto the road, leaving everything behind, I smiled because this time, I was finally driving towards something real. The road behind me was nothing but a fading memory. The weight of my past, the lies, the betrayal, her had been left behind in that empty parking lot, along with the version of me that tolerated it. For the first time, I wasn't leaving something behind because Wendy said so. That I was leaving because I chose to. I drove for hours. No GPS. No destination. Just the road stretching endlessly ahead of me, wide open like the future I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. Wendy had always made me feel like I had nowhere else to go. Like I needed her. Like without her, I'd be lost. But the truth, I wasn't lost at all. That I was exactly where I needed to be. With every mile, my thoughts drifted back to the past few years. How effortlessly she had lied, how she had played me without a second thought, how she had sat in the back of my taxi wrapped around another man without an ounce of guilt. That I gripped the wheel, a bitter chuckle escaping my lips. She never thought she'd get caught. She thought she was too smart, too careful, and when she finally was caught, she thought she could lie her way out of it. But now, she had no more lies left to tell, and I had nothing left to give her. By sunrise, I had driven into a small coastal town, the kind of place where no one knew me. A place untouched by her. The air was crisp, salty, clean, like the kind of fresh start I never realized I needed. I pulled into a roadside motel, nothing fancy, just a bed and a place to breathe. As I stepped inside, the mirror by the door caught my reflection. I stopped. For the first time in years, I really looked at myself, and what I saw, a man who had finally stopped fighting for someone who never deserved him. A man who had walked away instead of begging to be chosen. A man who was finally free. I let out a slow breath, rolling my shoulders. The tension that had lived in my bones for years was gone. I wasn't Wendy's husband anymore. I wasn't the man trying to hold on to a marriage built on lies. I was just Lucas, and for the first time, that was enough. I checked my phone, instinct kicking in before I even thought about it. No new messages. No calls. No Wendy. I stared at the screen for a moment, expecting something, one last desperate attempt, one last manipulation, but there was nothing, because I had taken away her power. I tapped into my blocked list, saw her name sitting there, and smiled. She had spent years making me feel like I wasn't enough. Like I had to prove myself. Like I had to be more for her to love me, but in the end, she was the one who wasn't enough for me, and that was her loss. That I locked my phone, shoved it in my pocket, and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The sun was rising over the water, casting gold and pink streaks across the sky. People were starting their day, shop owners flipping signs to open, joggers moving past with steady strides, the sound of waves crashing in the distance. The world was still turning, life was still moving forward, and now, so was I. I took a deep breath and walked toward the beach, my feet moving across the sand as the tide pulled in and out. For the first time in years, there was no one waiting for me. No one checking my location. No one controlling my next move. For the first time, I wasn't someone's husband, provider, or option. I was just me, and that was all I ever needed to be.